I did 20-day challenges and 6-week transformations, but came up through exercise and sports science and college strength and conditioning, so my brain just worked in long-term fashion when it came to program design, creating programs based around seasons. I'm Annie Miller, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, and I help my clients learn as they train and enjoy their lifts again, and I also help you, as a coach, create data-driven programs. Today, we cover the question, what is periodization, and how do you create long-term periodization in strength and hypertrophy training? When I did a little Goog, this was the answer. I know the title of this video is strength training, but weightlifting or resistance training is more accurate as we're going to cover transitioning from different seasons of training, i.e. hypertrophy or endurance and capacity, into true strength training. In training, periodization is the process of dividing training into periods over time. Most coaches do not learn to do this. Their certifications don't actually teach them anything about program design, which is unfortunate and also why I created my peer programming course. Check it out if you haven't. Tell me in the comments below, did you or do you get most of your program and periodization practices from being your own guinea pig? I just know that that was the case for me early in my coaching career. No shame in that game, but I hope that today's video helps give you a bit more structure and clarity in your process. What is long-term periodization and why do people sell short-term 12-week programs? For the sake of today's teaching, we're going with 6+ months of program design. It could be for a one-on-one client or a templated program, that doesn't matter. I honestly think the most common reason coaches sell 12-week programming or services is because they don't think clients will buy into a longer approach. It has very little to do with actual program design and far more to do with sales. That would be my hypothesis. But if you're confident in the long haul and results that can come from 6+ months of programming, then I do encourage you to sell that within your business. Let us begin. Steps to long-term programming and periodization. We start with macro, meso, and microcycles. What timeline are you programming for? Remember, this is past 12 weeks for sure. I like to think of these at least as 2 mesocycles, but probably like 6+ months. That would be considered your macro cycle, 6, 9, or 12 months in this case. The macro is made up of mesocycles. These are your several month training blocks if using 4 to 6 week training phases. And those 4 to 6 week training phases are your microcycles. You might hear people use the term training blocks to describe a micro or a mesocycle. We want to be specific, so I am separating the two. For long-term periodization, you need to determine your mesocycle goals or seasons. This most traditionally will be adaptation-based, such as hypertrophy, repeat strength, power, endurance, so on and so forth. These would be your focus for 3 to 4 month blocks, which would be your mesocycle. But if you're working a year-long program fully focused on hypertrophy, then you may go a different route for your mesocycle season and goals. Each mesocycle could be a movement pattern based or have an emphasis on a certain area of the body for a season. You could also use different tactics and training methodologies within each mesocycle. Sticking with the hypertrophy program, perhaps for 3 months you could focus on the use of drop sets. Another mesocycle, you could focus on tempo and 1 1/4 reps. I just want you to see the options that you have within periodization depending on your style of program design. So lay out your timeline and then separate that into mesocycles and define the focus of each mesocycle. Remember that mesocycle is your 3 months or so. Mesocycles often align with quarters of the year if you're working on a 12-month macro cycle. A little bonus note here, once you get into actual program design and start assigning sets and reps, you want to make sure the progression in volume from one phase to the next doesn't have huge jumps. We want to use and build upon the adaptations made by the body in the past phases. Next, you're going to choose your actual periodization. Periodization not only refers to those periods of training, but how one cycle within these periods progresses to the next. That's where 2 of the most common periodization models come into play. We have linear or undulating periodization. Linear periodization is most common for beginners and is highly effective. It can also be used with intermediate and advanced lifters, But at some point, training age will require something beyond a linear progression. A classic linear periodization looks like so. This is a figure taken out of my peer programming course. We see that there is an inverse relationship between volume and intensity, or load. You'd likely start the first mesocycle with some kind of capacity focus and slowly build into hypertrophy, then into strength, and then repeat strength or power. As those repetitions drop, aka the volume decreases, the load would become more challenging. We get into more depth in this inside peer programming about how this plays into main lifts versus accessory work, but for today, just apply this to all work being performed by the trainee. So if we're working strength in the main lifts, then we're working strength in the subsequent work as well. To be clear, you could also flip this and start with strength or higher load, lower volume work and build capacity and volume over your mesocycles within that macro cycle. That would be great for a trainee coming out of some kind of strength-based programming. Undulating periodization complicates things a little bit. If you're just starting out, I do suggest playing with the linear periodization first from a program design standpoint. You can create an incredibly solid program with this approach for most people. With undulating, training variables are manipulated daily or weekly, but the program itself can still progress in a linear manner. This is referred to as the integrated model seen in the diagram here. Within 1 week, a trainee will have a high volume, low load hypertrophy focus day, as well as medium and high load with lower volume days in power and strength. That's why you see the variation within each of the training variables. But the progression resembles that of a linear trend. Like I said, more complicated and doesn't fit into a nice box like linear progressions do. With undulation, you can do weekly or daily, like I mentioned, commonly referred to as WUP or DUP. And these happen to be two of my favorite methods for program design. The training variables of strength, hypertrophy, or power are all in 1 week for the same main exercise in daily undulation, whereas weekly undulation looks like a strength week, a hypertrophy week, or a power week, and maybe an endurance week. These are just general examples. You'd then progress that over the course of your mesocycles, which could look like a mesocycle focusing on overall capacity with elements of strength, power still involved throughout the undulation, into a mesocycle with a bias towards repeat strength. So your power and hypertrophy days may still have accessory work that pushes those strength ranges. Be sure to have fun with it. If you're overwhelmed by undulation, leave it be, you don't have to use it. But I wanted to give it some space here as it can make sense for longer term periodization in weight training. Once you've nailed down your periodization model, then you need to be sure that your mesocycles are in alignment with that. For example, endurance into hypertrophy, into strength, into repeat strength, versus bouncing between strength and capacity focused mesocycles, one should progress seamlessly to the next. Now you would plug in your training split and your sets and reps. Once you have your mesocycle goals and they're in the appropriate order within your macro cycle, you'll choose the training splits and the set and rep schemes that make sense for each goal of the mesocycle. And that is what you'll plug into your microcycles, those individual training phases. Don't worry about exercise selection yet. Your training split can absolutely change from mesocycle to mesocycle. If you need more help with that, check out my video on how to create a workout program. That has more about daily and weekly structure of your training sessions. For example, if you're going to dive into the deep end of daily undulation, then a 4-day upper lower split doesn't make the most sense. You'll likely be doing a full body split due to programming the same main lifts every day, or at least multiple times throughout the week for those strength, power, and endurance lifts. A 4-day upper lower makes sense for a lot of goals, but maybe mesocycle 1 follows this, and then mesocycle 2 follows a push-pull legs or general push-pull theme. There's no one size fits all. You can also, by all means, keep this same exact training split in every phase forever and ever, amen, through all your microcycles, into your mesocycles, and over the course of your macro cycle. If you love an upper lower or full body is your jam and it fits your mesocycle season and goal, then absolutely use it. Once you have your training splits defined for each of your microcycles or your phases, you can lay out general set and rep schemes that align with that mesocycle season, for instance, if it's strength-based or more capacity-based work. And when I say set and rep schemes, I legit want you to simply jot down set and rep schemes or ranges, you'd like to use from phase to phase, something like so. This is looking at only main lift volume and load. Remember that linear inverse relationship between volume and load? It's applied here via wave loading. You can see the higher volume waves and how they drop in volume per phase over the 6 months. The next diagram includes accessory work as well, but with the same trend. Accessory tracks with the main lift in that it is high volume, low load, and progresses over the 6 months. You don't need to use wave loading. This is an example. I haven't plugged in accessories here, not even accessory lift sets and reps, just the main lift, set, and rep scheme. From here, I would plug this into whatever training split I'm using for these phases, then exercise selection and more specifics for sets and reps. I hope you can see that we start literally macro and get more and more granular through this process. That's the name of the game for long-term periodization and program design. We stop here because that's where writing individual phases comes into play. And like I said, I have another video for that. So to wrap it up, these are your steps in setting up your long-term periodization for strength and hypertrophy training. Determine your macro cycle timeline and then your periodization type, so linear or undulating, your mesocycle goals and the order making sense within that periodization. Then you're going to plug in your training splits within each microcycle. To wrap it up, you will get into sets and reps, exercise selection, etc., which takes you into actual program design of those individual phases. That's your base. Ideally, this helps you put on some blinders and create structure to build upon so that you're not aimlessly programming phase by phase with no real direction in sight. By the end of this process, you should feel really good about the program that you've designed. Best of luck and happy gains. I will catch you guys in the next one.